Chapter 15. Blood Red Bay. The muffled clip-clop of his horse's hooves on the path had lulled him with their quiet, steady rhythm. Brian Hugh began to nod off, eyes plummeting closed, chin dipping, head lolling, leaning forward in the saddle when the distant howling shocked him back awake. He sat up and took a long inhale of cold air through his nose and rubbed his eyes. He undid the top buttons of his uniform blouse and let the wind coming off the canal bite into him. But the cobwebs of exhaustion did not clear, and he knew if he stayed mounted now, he would succumb. He scanned the road ahead, the woods running up the canal bank beside him and the path behind. No signs of pursuit, and wherever the howling canines were, they were not too close. He imagined he would have time to remount and ride hard if they made an appearance. Brian reined in his horse and dismounted. He kicked feeling back into his numb legs and ass, willing blood to flow into them. As the pins and needles dissipated, he looked into his mount's eyes. She was a beautiful blood-red bay. When Good Friday fell upon them, his own horse, Gawain, had been cut from under him. Brian had stumbled out of the field and found the bay wandering with no sign of her rider. She allowed him to take her reins and mount. They had been partnered ever since, but in the madness he had not thought to name her. He caressed her jaw. "All right, love. We'll be at the bloody boat before you know it, and there's plenty there for you to eat. I'll give you my word. Not far now, eh? Not far." He took a last look at the surrounding terrain, then he pulled his horse's reins and led her onward. Fatigue remained, threatening to entomb him, but Brian forced himself to the exercise of placing one foot in front of the other. Halfway to the barge, he bent and picked up a handful of snow, then slapped it on his cheeks, forcing himself to keep his eyes open. He knew it was a losing battle. He knelt, trying to reason with himself. "Look, you dumb twat. If you lay down and fall asleep now, you're most likely going to wake up being skinned. And won't that be a fucking treat after you've kept your sorry self alive for this fucking long? Now wake up. You're back on your fucking feet, double time to the bloody boat, and live to see the fucking dawn, right?" He stood, much more slowly than he had any right to, given the dressing down he had just given himself. He adjusted the lance that was strapped across his shoulders and flexed his sword arm. The thought of having to fight anything just now was terrifying. He sheathed his saber and pulled his right leather glove off. He slapped his right cheek as hard as he could. He pulled the glove back on, took a deep breath, then pressed on. The next hour passed in silence. Brian tried to stay keen, checking for pursuit, scanning the trees for monsters, but his mind was going numb and hallucinatory. Riding alongside Major Danforth and Sergeant Tremaine had kept him sane since Good Friday. The game of slaughtering the risen dead and even saving the pittance of survivors had given his own survival purpose and function. But now, detached from any greater circumstance, Brian had lost his rudder. Could not even really remember why getting to the boat was important. When they found the 38-meter barge floating in the canal, Major Danforth was well satisfied. She had been some sort of pleasure craft before the war, purchased new at the turn of the century when Europe sat at peace with itself, like a reformed alcoholic, ready to accept all the hard-earned lessons of the past, primed with a fresh calendar full of opportunity. The slate of history had been wiped clean by the new century's advent. The distinct possibility to fill this next 100 years with profound advancement of the best humanity had to offer lay before them. A bottle of Dom Perignon christened the vessel Jasmine on New Year's Day, and she sallied forth into the 20th century. Alas, humanity could not go a full 15 years without repeating the mistakes it had made again and again and again. So in September 1914, the Germans took Jasmine for their own. She was renamed Vorpostenboot 109 Hans Mauer. The Germans trimmed her in all black and bolted machine guns to her deck at fore and aft. She ran from the Riekwald Tunnel to the railhead at San Quentin, into the Somme River, and all the way down to the city of Ham, then back again. For the majority of men serving aboard V-109, the war had been a pleasure. They kept her deck, machine guns, and engine room in perfect order. Wherever the captain ordered them, they shepherded their vessel with speed and grace. To do anything below that standard was to risk being sent straight to the front lines to experience actual war. By 1917, any crew members attracted to that siren song had succumbed. Most recently, 3 young men had decided that life on a pleasure craft would be more pleasurable if they spent the days sipping on stolen wine. For their sins, they were excommunicated to the front. After the captain had them demoted and sent forward with an infantry battalion, all 3 were killed on their second morning in the line. The other spur, which shuttled men to battle from a peaceful life on the patrol boat, was more mundane. It was boredom. Between September 1914 and Good Friday of 1917, a half-dozen young men rotated through, served reasonably well on the pristine luxury craft, then requested transfer to frontline battalions. They had not joined the army to experience peace. They joined to test their mettle in battle. They wanted to impress their wives and lovers back home with pretty ribbons and crosses and tales of glory. They wanted war and all that came with it. To their soon-to-be regret, they got it. Thus, by Good Friday 1917, the V-109 was piloted entirely by men who had no desire to be anywhere else. Unfortunately, the fact that there was no immediate evidence of blood on their hands did not save them. On Good Friday, when the cadavers of officers bound for Berlin broke out of their caskets in a cattle car that was idling at the San Quentin train depot, the boatmen aboard the V-109 were some of their first victims. They died, rose up, and scattered into San Quentin on a killing spree. Thus, the V-109 was entirely vacant when Major Danforth, Brian Hugh, and Darren Tremaine found it. Major Danforth dismounted and walked the long length of the V-109, while Darren and Brian shared a cigarette. "What do you think, Sergeant?" asked Brian. "I'm not sure what the Major has in mind. Riverboat excursion, perhaps?" Darren passed the cigarette back to Brian. Major Danforth opened the doors below the wheelhouse and went below decks. The interior of the barge was spacious enough to accommodate a galley kitchen with bench seating for 6 and a plentiful store of dry goods. Beyond that, 8 hammocks hung with neatly placed footlockers below them against the bulkhead. With a hammock stowed during the day, the space afforded plenty of room for men on rotational duty during the day to take their ease. At the stern, he found a pristine and tidy engine room. Not a jot of grease or oil. Danforth climbed back up on deck and chewed his lip. He opened his cigarette case and pulled one of the last ones out. He lit it with his silver lighter and took a deep drag. "Gentlemen, I think we found our way out. How do you mean, Major? Asked Brian Hugh. Well, Lieutenant, this Peniche is in excellent running order. She's stout and seaworthy. She's got a shallow draft, which means she'll run fast. Where shall we run her to, Major? Asked Darren. At full steam, if we left at daybreak tomorrow, I reckon we could be in the English Channel before nightfall, within sight of Dover by dawn the next day. How does that sound, Sergeant? Brian and Darren took that in. Sounds too good to be true. What if it's in England too, sir? Asked Darren. Major Danforth tapped the ash on his cigarette and took another drag. Well, Sergeant, we shan't know until we know, yes? I, for one, will relish not being trapped behind enemy lines. Yes, sir. But playing devil's advocate, if we get trapped on the river and can't reach the channel, asked Brian Hugh. Any choice we make now comes with an inherent risk, but I don't see any way that our luck here can possibly hold. Each night the enemy seems to marshal their forces, yes? On Good Friday, what did we see after the first scrum? They separated into groups of 3 or 4. By Saturday, the largest gang we saw was how strong, would you say? A baker's dozen, sir, said Brian. Quite right. And then Sunday night. Perhaps 100 in that orchard, sir? Yes, perhaps twice that. They seem to be coalescing. We cannot, of course, face down 200 men. If discretion is indeed the better part of valor, then I believe we have reached the moment where said discretion is called for. The charge of the Light Brigade was not a heroic act. It was mass suicide led by a lunatic. I do not intend to follow his example. Brian and Darren nodded in agreement. We'll provision this vessel, then ride back to see if we can round up the threesome we left in that mill house by the stream, yes? A rather full complement if we're to take her across the channel. 500 yards southeast of them, they found a stout stone bridge arching over the canal's green span. The road led through the San Quentin rail yards, where German cattle cars awaited plunder. Darren, Brian, and Major Danforth filled a cart with rations and ammunition for the MG-08s. They hitched their unhappy horses to the cart and hauled it all back across the bridge, then north on the mule path to the V109. It was afternoon before they had it all aboard and stowed. All right, lads, enjoy the ride tonight. We'll need to cut our horses free tomorrow morning, Danforth said. Darren Tremaine felt an enormous sadness at the thought of saying farewell to Bathsheba, but he kept it to himself. Major Danforth and Brian Hugh felt the same tug, but survival trumped sentiment. They ate a late lunch in silence, fed and watered their horses, then rode out on one last patrol through the empty, rubble-strewn streets of San Quentin, past a vast German munitions dump, and back through the burned swaths of farmland the retreating German army had left in their wake. They found the little mill house by the wheat field unoccupied. They followed Durant and his company's tracks west as the first flakes of snow began to fall. When the sun began to set, they decided to give up the pursuit and started back south towards San Quentin. Darren felt Bathsheba stiffen under him, scenting it moments before he did. Then the distant clatter of machine gun fire reached them all. Major Danforth brought his horse round. They listened intently to the rattling echo. Christ, he's keeping up a racket. Sounds like he's fighting off a bloody army, said Brian Hugh. All right, lads, let's go have a look. If we can help, we will. If it's biting off more than we can chew, we'll hold our hand. They drew their sabres and rode north through the fields. 10 minutes later, they saw the entire eastern horizon blaze orange as the San Quentin Canal burst into flames. 5 minutes after that, they were cutting down dead Germans who chased Durant, Rupert, Wolfgang, Renoir, James, and Jonah out of the barbed wire. Danforth sent Durant and company towards San Quentin and the V-109. Then the horsemen kicked flanks and continued north, searching for the other survivors. They found no one alive, but the army of dead men chasing Isaiah Taylor found them. And now, slogging along the mule path in the falling snow, the hopes and dreams of an easy dawn exit from hell aboard the lovely V-109 seemed a pipe dream to Brian Hugh. But then, when he looked up from the mule path, the V-109 sat before him in the canal. Her long, flat black decks and machine guns were now covered in a coat of beautiful white. Brian tied off his horse's reins. He nearly wept with joy as he walked the little gangplank onto the deck. He lifted the lance he had strapped across his shoulder over his head and leaned it against the wheelhouse as he ducked down into the ship's hold. He twisted open a ration tin and devoured the mealy sausages, choking them down with biscuits and water. Then he lay back in a hammock and rested his arm over his face, letting the gentle sway suck him under.